I'm David Jensen. I'm the technical director here at University Theater.
I'm Mike White. I'm the assistant technical director.
So what we're talking about today is nailers, staplers, and how to build a flat. So we usually kind of talk about these as being pneumatics, air-powered tools, and that's primarily what we have, but they've really come a long way with battery-powered nailers and staplers. So we'll probably keep pneumatics around for quite a while, but they're starting to get pushed out by battery-operated tools just because the batteries are getting so much stronger now. But we're going to talk about pneumatics because that's pretty much what we use around here. Hopefully, we'll get some battery-operated tools someday, but maybe not this year. So we build with pneumatics, which fire, like I said, nails, brads, staples. So we use these tools for things that we're trying to nail together, and we don't want to take apart. So we're making our stock scenery, such as flats or flats are the main thing. So those are our stock things that we're going to reuse over and over and just kind of take them apart, put them back together for each show. So what we need to use for a lot of these things, because these brads could just be thin little pieces of wire, would be glue. So we use a lot of wood glue around here. The wood glue is where we get a lot of the strength, most of the strength, where the brad nail or the stapler is just kind of holding it together until the glue dries. But we'll get back into all the tools, different tools, in just a little bit. But we're going to talk about, the air, where we get the air from. So down here we have two compressors down front. So there's a small compressor and a medium-sized compressor. And we also have a large 80-gallon compressor back in the tool room. And that compressor runs to 5 different lines around the shop. Then that way we're not having to, roll these around all over the place. The compressor runs into the shop, also runs into the theater, so we can just kind of take our hoses to the wall and hook up there. But the portables are nice to have when we go over to places like Stewart Theater that doesn't have any air compressors over there. On the compressor, you can see 2 dials. One is the pressure in the tank, and one is the pressure coming out of the tank. So you always want to make sure that you are checking your gun to see what operating pressure it can go up to. We usually take the pressure pretty close to what its max is, usually because we're shooting into wood and we need that pressure behind it. All these guns have safeties on them, and the safeties can help fine-tune that pressure because they are all adjustable. This one might be, this one's easier to see. So this little dial here will adjust the foot of the safety. So physically push the gun closer or further away from the work when it is engaged. So you can kind of fine tune a lot of your stuff with that. If you find that you are shooting through your material, then you're going to want to back the pressure off, even if you've backed off the dial all the way here. So the compressor in the tool room runs around to different regulators in the shop. And this, again, is the dial for the pressure. So you adjust it here. This one's nice because it has a condensation trap right here too. so it catches a lot of that moisture that could get into your tools. Something that you always want to do with your tools is lubricate the tools. So a little bit of oil will help keep them going a long ways. So you'll usually want to do this. If it's being used once a day, then do it once a day. Do a couple drops in there, and then do a couple right where the hammer is. I usually like to do a couple drops of oil without staples in there, and then kind of blow the oil out so the oil isn't getting on your work that you're working on. So the way to connect the tool is you have this ring on the hose, and the ring just pulls back, pushes on, and then you push the ring forward. There's no twisting, there's no turning. So it's pull the ring back, push it on, push the ring forward. To take it off, you just pull the ring back, and it pops off. Let's see. Safety concerns. There's always lots of safety concerns with these guns. Big one is that safety that's already built in here. So these tools, you can see this one probably a little bit better. These tools are not supposed to operate unless that safety is pushed down and engaged on the piece of work. So you can't just shoot it across the room. You need to be engaging that. That's what it's supposed to do. Sometimes they will get jammed up though, so don't think that you could just play around and just pull the trigger, because you could actually shoot. So there's a couple other things too on here. And this one, probably not going to be able to see this, maybe. This gun has, you can see, a single shot indicator and multiple shot indicators. So you can flip this switch and it's going to change your trigger and how it reacts. So single shot, you need to push it down and pull the trigger for it to go. Once you pick it up, you need to take your finger off so you can do another shot. If you're doing sequential shots, then you can keep your finger on the trigger, and every time you engage it, it's going to shoot. That can get you into trouble, so we try to leave it just on single shot. Porter cable has a trigger that you have to change out. So the red trigger will do single shots. You have to completely take off the trigger and put on a black trigger in order to do multiple shots. Look at that, Kevin's right on in there, so you can kind of see it right there. It's kind of listed right there. While you're there, you can also see that it lists 70 PSI minimum and 120 PSI maximum. So most of the tools usually go up to about 120. We're usually sitting a little over 100 PSI for most of the tools. But always check your tools. It should have it listed somewhere. Let's see. So the other big issue that happens is people shooting themselves with one of these guns. So what can happen, the most common thing is what we call a double shot. So when you're pulling the trigger and you shoot, the force of it kind of pushes you back, and before you know, you kind of come back down and shoot another one. And maybe you don't land in the same spot. Now I'm shooting a staple across here. And if my hand is here, then I'm shooting into my hand. Or I'm shooting Mike, who's standing on the other side of the table. So whenever you're shooting, you need to make sure that you are holding this firmly so it can't push you back. So you're just shoving just a thin wire into the work. You need to make sure that that gun doesn't move from where you want to put that staple. So fingers are the biggest concern. The other big one that a lot of people get is their legs, because maybe they're used to just doing the single the bump shot, and they keep their finger on the trigger. They put their gun to their side, then they're shooting themselves in the leg. So that's another really common injury. And then again, shooting across the room, bumping into someone else, coming down off of a ladder. You need to make sure that no one is underneath you. There's lots of different stories that have been out there of people getting kind of shot in the head. So we'll talk about some PPE in just a little bit. Some of the other things that can happen when you're shooting, again, this thin wire, you can run into things like knots, which are really dense. And this thin little wire doesn't want to go through that. It wants to go through the soft wood. It doesn't like to go through that. Another thing, I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see this, Kevin, can you? So there's grain in the wood. Sometimes that staple is going to go in, and it's just going to follow that grain, and it's just going to kind of pop right back out. So whenever you're nailing things together, sorry, I'm moving too fast. If I'm nailing these two pieces of wood together using something other than a 2-inch brad, if I'm using something like this finish nail, then I need to make sure my hands are out of the danger zone, because that nail could kind of come up this way, come out this way, come out that way. I need to make sure my fingers are clear, because otherwise, if you're right there, that nail could come right through, and then next thing you know, you're attached to your work. And that does not feel good. Other things that can happen are ricochets. So again, this is just a thin little piece of wire. If you're shooting into something that is very dense, like masonite, then again, that could just kind of ricochet off, go across the room, or kind of come back at you. So you need to make sure that you're shooting straight in. You're not at any kind of angle this way or that way, because it will just kind of ricochet out. Another problem is shooting through your work. So if I was, moving on you guys, if I was nailing a piece of molding to this wall, and maybe the pressure is up too high, or maybe I miss, that nail could go through. And if Mike is over on the other side of the wall and I don't know he's there, then all of a sudden I'm shooting him. So you need to always be aware of people on the other side of thin flats. And the other big safety concern is with one of these, which we've used quite a bit for cleaning. It's just an air nozzle. But the big thing that you can do is you never want to use this to clean yourself. Yes, it's tempting to get the dust off, but you can inject air into your bloodstream with this, which you don't want to do. So you can use this for cleaning other objects, but you never want to go above 30 psi. This one does have a safety. It's got these holes inside, so in case it does get plugged up, the air can come out the side. But you don't want to test that. So don't use this on yourself. And another failure that can happen is you need to check your hoses. These will crack and break after a while, so you need to make sure that your hoses are nice and strong. You don't want a hose whipping around the shop when it breaks, because you've got a lot of pressure in that line. Mike, you want to talk about some of the PPE that we
Yeah,
use?
absolutely. So we use several different types of personal protective equipment. The most common one we use is safety glasses. Safety glasses are going to save your life and save your eyes. They will keep anything, any of the debris or any nails or staples from getting into your face and your eyes. Another type that we use are earmuffs or earplugs. If you're using something that's louder than you're usually used to, and for a long period of time, you want to make sure to use hearing protection so you don't hurt your ears. If you are working with stuff above your head, or somebody else is working above you, or there's tools above your head, hard hats. Hard hats are always good for protecting your head. It's a lot of protecting your head. Also, when you work with pneumatics and stuff, you want to make sure that you cover your legs so that if for some reason it does blow out or miss, then your clothes will catch a brunt of it rather than your skin. It's also good for just protecting you entirely. You want to make sure that when you're in a shop using most of the tools, especially pneumatics, that there isn't anything on your body that drapes or hangs down, such as like you want to tie back your hair or anything else like that, so that it doesn't get into the tools or get caught in the things that you're doing. Yeah, so that's most of the normal PPE. I can start on tools if you, unless you want to.
You want to do the
Yeah, I can do these two, and then
Okay.
we'll move into those.
Okay.
So the first of our most common tools we use is the narrow crown stapler. The narrow crown stapler is the workhorse of the pneumatics that we use. So as opposed to talking about nails and stuff like that, we're going to start with staples. The narrow crown stapler, especially this Hitachi, can hold a variety of different sizes of narrow crown staples. There are other things such as medium crown and wide crown, and we'll get to those in a little bit. So they hold several different lengths of staples also, from these 3/4 inch all the way up to these 2-inch. Each brand is different in terms of the lengths that they can hold and their capacity of the width of the crown on the staple. So each of the staples have 2 legs and then the crown on the top. So essentially, it's like firing in 2 nails at once with the attachment in between. This one, these Hitachis, how you put in the staples is there's a side lever on it. You pull all the way back till it locks in, and then the staples go face down onto this piece of metal and just slide all the way forward. And then there's a button to release, and now it's locked in. The safety on these is this front lever, so that it's easy to notice and it's easy to use. For firing with it, so it's unplugged just for safety sakes. It fires out of the small hole near the front of this, near the front of the safety, but not on the safety. A different brand, such as this Porter cable, the safety is on the front, and the area where the staples come out is behind it. So you just want to be aware of where your staples come out or your nails at any time when using these. So now that you have your staples in, your safety and your trigger, make sure you're in the right mode. And then whatever you're attaching to whatever else, you want to line them up and then line up your narrow crown stapler, or honestly, most of these tools work all the same, making sure that you are vertical to your piece of wood. It's a very, very simple tool. And this one has an air exhaust on it that can surprise you the first time you use it. So it has a little adjustable air nozzle that will fire out the excess air. The good thing about using narrow crown staples versus brad nails or any other kind of nail is they hold on to the material a lot more and more securely because it is multiple points of attachment to it. And so it will bite and hold on better than just nails. But also most of these tools are a temporary solution where you want to use glue to hold them permanently. Anything else specifically?
So just real quick,
Yeah.
would you just kind of show if you're putting two pieces of wood together, just kind of lining up what you're talking about knowing where that staple comes out.
So if I were to fire and attach these two together, I will line up my two pieces of wood. So if I'm going to do it, so say I've got them nice and lined up, and then I'm going to turn it so you can see it. And so then I'll take my staple gun and I'll line it up with where I'm going to attach. So say for instance, this one's very simple, so I'll use the other one because it's more common to make the mistake. A lot of people will think that it comes out of the safety because it's the largest and most obvious thing. So if you line up the safety where it is, you're actually going to be firing actually further back here than up here. So you may entirely miss your board if you're firing this far back. So you just want to be aware of where your staple or your nail are going to be coming out of. So with the other one, with how its safety is, you can see that see if I can get it closer. The safety is here and the nail comes out in the front or in the middle of the safety here. So you just want to be aware that you aren't going to miss your wood entirely or fire off the other direction and miss your connector board. These specific narrow crown staplers hold 18 gauge staples. So there are several different types of narrow crown staples in different gauge, which the gauge is the thickness of the wire. So this one holds 18 gauge and anywhere from 1/4 inch to 1.5 inches. They should all be labeled by the brand of them, and that's just what ours are specifically. The brad nailer is very similar to the narrow crown stapler in its design. The big difference, though, is just the carriage where the consumables are. So this one holds brad nails, which are a smaller form of nail than what you're used to with like 10-penny nails, which are the large construction ones. These are used a lot more for finishing work or molding, or what we use them for is putting Luan onto flats. So how you load this gun is there is a lever on the back here that you push down, and the entire back section opens, allowing you to remove and place in your nails. So you want to make sure that the brad nails have a T shape. So you want to make sure that the pointy end is down and the T shape, the T on the top is upward. So they fit in all the way down to the bottom of it and lay it down and push them forward. And then shut it all the way in. There is an indicator here that when the brad nails are out, it'll turn red to indicate that it is out of nails for you before you start firing blankly. You always want to be aware of how much nails or staples are in the gun, so you don't just keep firing and firing and firing, and then eventually half of it just falls back off. This one, the safety is behind the hole where the nails come out. So just awareness of all of that. Trigger, same thing. They're used the same way, but between both of them in the same fashion, but they have different purposes. The brad nails with them just being small nails, will not hold as much weight or any larger materials as a staple or will. So you want to use them for smaller or thinner materials and accompanied by glue. Like I said, we use them for flats primarily on attaching the luan, and we'll use narrow crown staples for attaching the frame together. Make sure I didn't miss anything. Yeah, these are also 18 gauge nails, and they hold anything from a half an inch to 2-inch brad nails. So again, you just hold them into their position, making sure you know where they come out and where they launch. Hold it down on the back end, and then pull the trigger. Those are essentially the basics of these two guns. Then Dave's going to move on and explain lesser used ones.
Right. So the reason why we say that we use these the most is because we use the narrow crown with the double leg for putting our frames together. But that's going to make, quite an impression in the wood. And then we use the brad nail, which this is a better example because it's just a tiny little head. So we use that on the face, sorry, there it is, on the face of the luan, because 2 layers of paint, that's going to fill that in. You're not even going to know that that brad's there, especially in theater where people are sitting 20 feet away. So these two guns are what we use the most often. And again, I had Mike explain about the safeties, because again, you kind of saw it's going back this way, that way. That's the biggest thing where people get hurt, is by that nail coming out from the side and them not knowing where it's gonna come out of. You really need to kind of make sure that you're lining up into the center of the wood that you're shooting together. Other tools fasteners that we use are, we've got a finish nailer. So this is a little bit thicker of a nail, a little bit thicker of a gauge. So this is a 16 gauge. So this is a little more substantial. So we use this for things like molding and whatnot, or other projects, lots of different things. The one that I like to use the most is the angle finish nailer. The angle finish nailer is even a thicker gauge than that finish nailer, so it's a 15 gauge. So it's a little more substantial. And this is great, again, for putting together molding and whatnot. And the design of this tool is angled like that, so it's easier to get into corners of things. So when you're trying to get those weird angle shots, the finish nailer, the straight one, the body can kind of get in the way. So this one is getting it so that exit isn't really blocked.
One thing you do want to be aware of while using all of these is the length of your nail or your brad. And you want to make sure that you're using the proper length and size consumables, nails or brads, for the proper job, so that you're not, when you fire it through, it's not going to stick out like extraneously, or doesn't fire far enough into the wood to attach them together. So you want to make sure that you use proper length materials.
Right, exactly. So the one for 1x, which is what we use for putting our frames together, we usually use 1.5 inch long staples. So this is 3/4 of an inch. So we're getting another 3/4 of an inch of attachment. Put the glue in there. That's a pretty good bond. You don't want to just use inch, because that's only getting 1/4 inch of bite into your wood. So you want to make sure that you're getting a long enough leg, but again, you don't want to be too long, because again, it's going to follow that grain and it's going to pop out. and you're just going to make more work for yourself. So I'll do the next two staplers, and then
I'll do the small ones.
So something else that we have is the medium crown stapler. So this is a little more like the finish nailer, which has a little more of a substantial gauge staple in it. So this is good for construction that the audience isn't going to see, because it's putting in a pretty good leg in there. The crown's pretty wide. It's gonna beat up your work. You're gonna have to do a lot of finishing to kind of cover that up. So medium crowns don't get used a ton, but it's great for construction. It's good behind the scenes type stuff. And then the other one that we have is a wide crown. So this is a wide crown stapler, so you can see it's even wider than that one. So 1/4 inch, and then 1/2 inch, and then 3/4 of an inch. These come in really handy for when you're trying to bridge things together. So you can just kind of take these nails and just staples and kind of join pieces of wood together. That's what we use it for most often. We've used it for a variety of different things, but usually that's kind of what we're doing, is just kind of joining things like that.
Yeah, so moving in the opposite direction of getting larger, our smaller nails and staples we use, we have pneumatic fabric staplers. So some people call them T50 staplers or fabric staples. They hold essentially wood versions of what your small staples that you put in a stapler at home are. So these are just larger gauge and thicker to hold more pressure and be able to be used into wood. So what we use them for is holding fabric and stapling fabric to wood. So say for instance, you want to do a soft covered flat, you would use the stapler to attach your muslin or your covering to your wood. The one that we don't use very often, but we have, is the tiny, tiny pin nailer. The pin nailer has these tiny little nails that are good, very, very good for delicate work or small molding that where you don't have room to fill or be able to fix the holes that you create from nails or larger nails or brad nails or finishing nails or anything like that. They come in handy when we need them. And then we also, you want to do the last two?
Yeah, I'll do
Okay.
The last two that we have, let's talk about this one because it's taking up all the room, is our framing nailer. So this shoots these big old framing nails. This is what we would use to connect 2x4 together. But around here, we don't use this that often at all, because usually when we're connecting 2x4, we are going to use screws. I really do not like framing nailers because they just cause trouble. Because when you're taking things apart, which is what we do a lot, you have to take this apart with a hammer usually, and you're knocking pieces of wood apart, and then you've got a big long staple or nail that's sticking out of something, and that wood always just kind of usually falls like that. Now you've got pieces of wood with nails sticking up all over. Someone usually walks by, doesn't see what's going on, and they step on it. And that's never a good thing. So usually when we use this, it's because we're going to throw it away after we're done with it. This thing is an antique, and we've had it forever because it doesn't get used that often. But it is handy to have every now and then. Something else that we have, which is a really fun item, which is kind of job specific, is a plastic finish nailer. So these nails are plastic. We use this a lot with the ShopBot. Our ShopBot, the computerized CNC machine, will cut out our work. But a lot of times when we've got small pieces that want to pop up and move, we need to make sure that we're securing that down to the bed. But we don't want to use something like this where the cutter is going to possibly run into it. But if we use a plastic finish nail, then it doesn't matter if that blade runs into it. So this is really handy for doing tiny little parts on the ShopBot that could go flying, and we want to make sure that everything just stays secure on the table. What's nice about this is after you're done, you can pop it up. You take a chisel, you just kind of pop it off, cut it, you can sand it, you can finish it. It really just kind of disappears, and you don't have to worry about when you recycle pieces of wood, when you run it through your saws, you're not going to run into it again. So that's a really nice thing.
With all of these tools, since they are pneumatic, you want to make sure that your pressure is appropriate for the tools that you're using. Some of the larger tools, you need to use a higher PSI than, say, a small little pin nailer. So you just want to make sure that it's appropriate for the job you're using. We typically use most of it at about 90 PSI ish, around there for a lot of our jobs.
One thing that we forgot to talk about, I was just thinking about this. So PSI, something that we usually run lower PSI is the fabric stapler, because you're dealing with something delicate like fabric. So you don't want to shoot your nail right through the fabric. So usually we run the fabric stapler at a lower PSI. But if you notice, there's no safety on here. Because you can see these safeties, if you had something like that on a fabric stapler, that's just going to get stuck in the fabric and it's going to tear holes in it. So this has no safety whatsoever. So when you pull that trigger, you are shooting a nail. So you have to be really careful about that. Fabric stapler is pretty much the only one that I know of. The pin nailer, I thought that.
Oh, does it? Is it? I don't think it is.
The pin nailer does not. Yeah. You are correct. So look at that. Learn something. So always be aware of what has the safety, but again, don't play around, point it at someone pulling the trigger. Which is why safety glasses are so important, because accidents do happen. So we're going to talk about two different types of flats. Let's talk about the theatrical flat first. So this is a muslin covered, muslin being the fabric, covered flat. So this is considered to be a theatrical or Broadway style flat. And then this flat over here is a hard covered flat, which is covered with Luan, which is about 3/16 thick, which is that thick right there. So it's a thin plywood. And it is framed, again, with the 1x, but this 1x is turned on its edge, where this 1x is turned on its face. So we get a very thin profile flat, and this flat is a lot stiffer. I'm sure a lot of people have seen a show where someone slams a door and the whole wall kind of shakes, which is why we use a lot of times the Hollywood style. Turning the wood on its edge like that it makes it a lot stiffer, and then covering it in something in a Luan makes it even stiffer and takes the shake out of it. There are some people that do cover their Broadway style flats with Luan, but you're still going to get a lot of that flex in there. We like to do it just with fabric, because usually when we're building this style, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make a very lightweight flat. This is something that we're going to probably fly in the air, hang in the air, or something like that. Hollywood style, we're going to have on the ground, we're going to screw it down. We're going to have doors in there. We're going to have, molding attached to it, things like that. So it's a lot easier to attach molding and other items to something that has a lot more framing to it. So what we have is we've got our top rail and bottom rail and our stiles on the side. And then we have these corner blocks. And these corner blocks are just glued down and then stapled. And that's what makes your joint. The Hollywood style, again, like we were talking about, we've got our top rail, bottom rail, sides, and toggles at every 2 feet. These are what are stapled in from the side, and then we use the brad nailer on the front to do to attach that. Using glue on both joints. So the joint here, and then else we glue the whole frame, and then put the glue on down, use the brads, hold that down until the glue dries. Let's see. So the muslin, we use some glue, or there's lots of different things that you can do for attaching it. What we usually do is we do a watered down glue. That helps glue it to the frame, but it also helps size it. So muslin is just cotton fabric. It's a medium weight cotton fabric, and it will shrink when you get it wet. So it has not been pre-shrunk. So when you cover something, you're gonna have some wrinkles in there and whatnot, but as soon as you size it, then it's gonna shrink and it's gonna pull all those wrinkles out, and it's gonna give you a fairly tight surface. What's nice about having a fabric surface is that it's very easy to paint on. Some people do cover their hard covered flats in muslin just to give it a better paint surface. But usually if you're doing Luan, you just stick with the Luan. And again, usually if you're just doing the muslin covered, you're just doing a fabric covered flat. Other advantages too, just while we're talking about it. Kevin, you can pan over there. You can see that we've got a lot of stock flats sitting over there. So we've got some 8-foot tall, 4x8, some 4x12, some 4x10s, and they take up quite a bit of room in the shop. The theatrical style, they're a third of the size. So you could have a lot more flats in stock because they're gonna take up just that much less room. But typically the shows that we're doing in our spaces, we are going to be using Hollywood style. We just don't fly that much stuff. What else should we talk about? So stock sizes, again, those are 4x8, 4x12, 4x10. We also have some door frames back there. We also have 3-foot wide flats, 2-foot wide flats, 1-foot wide flats. So just depending on what we need, we can use from a variety of different flats and put them together to get a variety of different sizes. We can even attach more flats on top. So if I needed my 4x12 to be a 4x14, I could take a 2x4 flat and attach it to the top, and that extends it up. So we use them across the top quite a bit. So I kind of think of flats as just kind of a basic Lego block that you're just kind of adding them together to get whatever shape that you're trying to get. And then we'll build custom sizes to whatever if the designer designed a wall that is 13'6" long, then we'll build a 1'6" wide flat and attach it to the end of a 3 4x12s, something like that to get whatever size we need. So we keep the stock over and over and just kind of reuse. Eventually they get beat up. Usually it's too much paint. They get too heavy, they start falling apart. and then we just kind of cycle through them as needed, depending on the show. So I've got some examples of what we do to some of our flats when they get too old, but we'll get to that later.
Want to get into building some flats?
Let's see, let's just make sure. Oh, price. So muslin is a little bit cheaper than the Luan. So you can get muslin about $3 a yard. And for a 4x8 flat, you would need 3 yards. So that's $9, where Luan is about $13. The framing is a little more minimal. So you're getting by with a little less framing. So Hollywood style flat or theatrical flats are a little bit cheaper, not a ton cheaper. But these are more substantial. They'll last a lot longer. This is fabric. They get holes in them easy. They get damaged easy. So you may be replacing them more often than Hollywood style. The other big concern too with the muslin style is a lot of times you are flying these. So they're going up by the lights. They're sitting next to the lights. So you want to make sure that you are treating your muslin so it's not a fire hazard. So you definitely want to look into what your fire code requires of you, no matter where you are. So it's always a good idea to use some flame proofing. You can buy muslin that's already been treated. That doesn't shrink like regular, just plain muslin does. So you have to be careful of that. Is there any other differences between these that I'm missing?
Not really.
Okay. Then we're going to move on to actually making a flat.
And grab a couple tools from our table. And then we'll build a flat. So we're going to start with a Hollywood style flat. So we're going to build the first one on edge. I can do this one if you want to do that one.
I figured we would kind of do it together, but you can talk about it. You do that side and I'll do this side.
So with the Hollywood style flats, with everything when you're cutting with wood, you always want to remember the thickness of your material when you cut your pieces. So I've already cut all of these to the right sizes. So we're building this at a 2 foot by 3 foot flat. So you would think, okay, so I need 2 of them at 2 foot, 2 of them at 3 foot. That's not right, actually, because of your thickness of your material. So since we're using 1x, you have 3/4 of an inch on each side that you have to subtract from your long pieces. So we actually have 2 at 2 foot and 2 of them at 2 foot 10.5. So your 3/4 and your 3/4 makes your 1.5 inches to subtract from it. When building Hollywood style flats, you want to, and when you're laying them out for cutting your wood, you want to make sure that you are supporting the structure itself. So if you're designing them for custom flats or something like that, make sure that each of the material is supported by other pieces or basically hit the floor. You want to make sure that the entirety of the flat is strong and supported. Typically in theater, also, we will have our bottom board, the board that touches the floor or attaches to the other one, running the entire distance or as far as you can so that it adds one long base structure so that if you need to move it across a surface, it will be flat and even as opposed to having many different points and different heights.
Well, it's easier to break this apart as you're sliding it. So you just want a foot, one single foot for it to be able to slide on. So,
and it's also a lot stronger of a connection and force point to be pushing down on your wood onto it, as opposed to, say, if this piece is up here, you don't want this one underneath, so that it will, all the force is put down onto the bottom board so that it's all structural. So getting back to our things, so I've cut all of our pieces so that we have a 2 foot by 3 foot flat. So our piece of Luan is cut to 2 foot by 3 foot. And then we have our two styles, which are the top and the bottom.
Rails.
I get them confused.
No, me too.
Yes, rails. So you have your rails and your styles, and then your toggles. So your top and your bottom boards are cut to your full length, and then our 2 foot 10.5 to meet in between them. For attaching, we are going to use a narrow crown stapler and some glue. So I'm gonna come do this front one just so they can see it.
Sure. Why don't you, here, I'll
Okay.
go over there.
Yeah. So I'm going to attach my narrow crown stapler so that I'm ready to go. Safety glasses. Make sure I don't hit me or anybody else. So I'll take my glue and I'll run a bead of it. I like to do it on the end of my vertical piece so that I don't have too much runoff and I don't have, I don't miss it. Or you can do like Dave does, where he puts the bead on the other piece. Doesn't make too much of a difference. It's just a personal choice. So then I will line my two pieces up. So I'm going to match up in the corner. So I want to make sure that this board is flush with the end grain of this other board. So I will use my arm further back away to hold down my top board. And then I'll use my hand to lift up and flush out the top and the side of my other piece I'm attaching to. So then what we'll do, keep making sure my hand and everything is out of the way of this because I'm left-handed. I will line up my stapler, making sure my hand is clearly out of the way of not going to attach to the board, and that my board is flush. Push all the way in, holding it essentially with my stapler. Then I'm going to fire one. Make sure that you have enough pressure to force it all the way in so that it doesn't stick out. Like mine is sticking out a small bit, but that's okay. We can fix that later.
We'll go check the pressure.
Yeah. So then I will line up the other one. So now I'm not holding this front one because it's flush on the top. It's held down. So I'll use my hand way farther out and line up my second shot, making sure this is nice and flush. And then fire again. Does seem low.
I just turned it up a little bit.
So then I'll do a third one, and then this is done. So we will repeat this on all four sides. It's not as imperative with this simple flat to make sure that the corners are straight and 90 degree. If you're making a more complex flat, it's more important because of everything relies on other pieces. So, but this one, since it's a square and we can push it later, I'm not as worried about it.
So a lot of times you're working together with another person. If Mike is working on that piece of wood, I don't want to touch that piece of wood because a lot of times this wood can be warped and stuff. So what's square and flush and nice and pretty down on that end is not going to be the same down here. So you always want to let the person get done with that side before someone else comes over to this side and starts nailing this side. So you can kind of just move around each other, working together, but never try to work on that same piece because you're just going to fight each other.
So now we'll move on and we'll finish off this flat doing the same thing as we've been doing. So now I'm gonna, because of being left-handed and everything, you can see how Dave is doing his on his side. And I'll do very similar. So I'll use the gun to push up against, Make sure I'm nice and flush. My hand's way back out of the way. And then that's done.
And it's usually a good idea not to stand directly in the path. So you always kind of just want to move away while they're doing that, move off to the side, so you're not shooting your friend. What's nice about the narrow crown staples is because it's a thin wire, if things get off a little bit, you can just kind of bend the wood. It's just going to bend that wire until you get it where you want it to be. So we usually just do 1, 2, 3, one in the top, one on the bottom, and then one more in the middle just for strength.
And now you have a frame. So next we'll move on to lidding our flat. So essentially what that is just gluing and brad nailing on our piece of Luan. So this is where you will square your flat. So because you have cut your piece of Luan to being square, you will want to more rely on the squareness of it over the squareness of your frame, because your frame can't rely on it being square. So what we'll do is we will push the frame to line up with the edges of the Luan. So we'll put a bead of glue around the entirety of it so that we can lay our material up.
We want to make sure that we are putting the good side up. There's usually a good side and a bad side. We're going to call this the good side.
Yep. So I'm going to line up my short end. You always want to start on a shorter end because it is less likely to push and warp and move than the long ends are. The long ends are easier, are more malleable.
It's just, you've got more leverage with the long end to be able to push and pull. And if you can see, this is a really good example of not worrying about the frame being warped. So it's just off a little bit. We're just going to worry about that one side first.
Yeah, so I'm going to flush to this end and to the corners, just at the very end, so that I know that I am not off shifted to one side or another, and flush to the end. So I'll start with my brad nailer in a corner that I flushed both of, and just do one, and then I'll move over about 3 inches, and I'll make sure, using my thumb further away, making sure that my frame is flush still to my Luan, and I'll add another one, and I'll just keep going down the length of my short. And just make sure to put a brad in each corner to secure them in. And you will most likely have some glue run off.
And usually you're spacing about every 6, maybe 8 inches, depending on the work. Sometimes it will warp a little bit, so you may need to add some more. So it's nice to have a friend, again, to help you kind of put these together, because they can be down on this end and they've got the greater leverage to push and pull. So you just want to work the warp out from one end down to the other, because that wood could be bowed in like this. It could be bowed out like that. You're going to not want to just put it down and line up this corner. You're trying to line it up the whole way down. So you're just kind of pushing and pulling as you go.
Yep. So now that we have the short end secure, I'm not going to worry about it anymore. We're going to work on our way around the flat on the long side. So I'm going to start on the side that I secured first and work my way down. So Dave's going to help me making sure that it's flush where I'm stapling or where I'm brad nailing. So I'll start on this end and work my way down with communicating with Dave about what needs to be done to the frame or to the Luan to push to make sure it's flush.
And usually it's just kind of a point this way, point that way. Tell me which way to push the wood.
It's pretty good where it is. And once you get to a point where you can't reach anymore, you can pass it off to them. And
actually,
you're going to use yours.
This guy.
Yeah.
Again, you want to be aware of where your brad is going to be coming out, and you need to be aware of the thickness of the wood that you're shooting into. So you want to make sure you're trying to get into the center. You don't want to be too far this way. You don't want to be too far that way.
So now that you have two sides done, we'll work on the other long side just to make sure that it pushes in. And then we'll do our last short side just to make sure that it's because once you have three sides in, your wood isn't moving anymore because it's already secured on three whole sides. So we'll work on the other long side next. And just repeating the same process where I'm just going to push a little bit on it to make sure that it's flush, because it should be essentially flush other than maybe a bow in your wood itself in your frame. So you'll just want to make sure that as you go down that it's still remaining flush with a slight push if it needs it.
And sometimes you can get a little bit of a warp here, so you can kind of push or pull depending on where it needs to go. But this one, we're just going to call it good because we're getting low on time.
Now you have a flat.
So that's a 2 foot by 3 foot Hollywood style flat. And we're going to switch over. We're going to do a theatrical style. So we're going to change out to 3/4 inch narrow crown staples for the corner blocks that we're going to use. And the corner blocks that we're using for this, as an example, is just, again, the 3/16 inch Luan. Usually people use 1/4 inch plywood, which is a little bit stronger, but we're just gonna use this as an example. So we are going to make a 2 foot by 4 foot flat. And again, your bottom piece sits on the ground. So when you slide it along, that one piece is just kind of catching all that. Because again, if this is covered in fabric and that was your joint, if you hit like a screw in the ground or something, you can bust your flat apart. So you always want to have that.
You want to turn 90 just for the sake of the block? Or you think you're good? I mean,
actually, I'm just going to push off just a little bit. So we've got this big old corner block jig, which is kind of nice because it's so big that it acts just like a framing square. So a lot of people, when they're putting their flats together, they'll put a framing square into the corner because you're getting a lot more secure. I'm not sure one. You're securing this down, and this corner block is going to hold the frame square. Where the Hollywood style, the Luan is squaring it back up. So when you're building it this way, you need to make sure that you are building this as square as possible because you're just covering it in fabric. The fabric is not going to square anything up. So you need to take your time this time on this style to make sure that it is square. So I like to come along and mark where that goes. The corner block jig is good because it holds this off 3/4 inch. Mike, could you pull that over? And what we need to have is that to be held back 3/4 inch. So when we have another flat that meets up to it, then it's flush on the edge. So that kind of helps secure it right there. So now it's nice and even. If that was too far this way, then that wood would not line up on the next flat when you're making a corner of a wall. So having a jig is a good thing to be able to make those marks. So I'm just going to take a little glue. Usually try and do a triangular pattern of some sort. I'm going to put this back on. This will help hold everything together.
You're upside down. Your grain. So you have on your corner blocks, because you made it out of plywood, there's a grain to it. It's important when using corner blocks that your grain runs perpendicular to the seam that you are attaching, because otherwise your joint is significantly weaker than if it was. It's significantly weaker if it's parallel to your seam, because then it can crack and break off, similar in the same vein as your seam. So if you cross grains, then it will hold tighter and hold stronger.
Okay, so I'm going to start with one in the corner. Same thing with the grain. I try to run the staple going across the grain. If I go with the grain, that staple will tend to go into it too far. So I try to cross the grain so I can catch it. And I'm shooting a little too far. So I'm going to adjust. Nope, I'm all the way out. So that pressure adjust that I did for shooting into the 1x is a little too much for the Luan, but it's okay. It's not horrible. So now that I've just got that tacked, again, I like to go in a triangular pattern. And it looks like I probably hit a knot down below, so that's why that crumpled there. Always trying to put 2 staples on either side of the joint.
Because you're open on the back. You're
Oh geez. How did I do that? I don't know. Oh no, it was still shooting. Anyway, craziness. Okay, so nope, I missed those. So that's one corner block.
And then you just rinse and repeat all the way around.
Yeah, I kind of feel like we're gonna run out of time. We have 10 minutes. So what we may do is just kind of talk about it, because I don't think we're gonna have enough time. But yeah, exactly. So just kind of keep going. So mark your corners, glue it down, nail it down, make sure the feet is down in, and then staple it. And then you'll have a frame similar to this right here. After we get the frame done, we're gonna play make-believe. Let's do this. So here's a 2x4 frame. We're gonna pretend that it's the other way. What we want to
cover this one if you want.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of thinking. Let's do that. So what we want to do is drape the fabric onto here. We're gonna, yeah, sure, why not? Let's cover it. Okay, so we're gonna run this along. We've got a lot of extra here. So we're gonna take this and we're just gonna get it bigger than the frame. And muslin tears very nicely. So you can just kind of get it set. So there's our frame. We're going to use our fabric stapler. Again, make sure that you are wearing safety glasses, because what we're going to do here is we're going to be shooting straight up into the air. It's flat. It's so tiny. So I always like to start in the center of one side. We're going to flip it. I'm going to go in the center of the other side. And then work your way around. So then you're pulling across. You don't need to pull too tight. Because again, that glue is going to shrink it up. And usually I'll come to the corner and I'll work on this corner, not all the way to the corner, and then I'll work on this corner. But because this frame is so small, I'm just going to go ahead and flip it over. And what you want to do is you want to dress your corners. By folding the fabric kind of like into a nice little 45. That. And then again, did not practice.
It takes a little bit of practice to land these.
All right, we're playing. Okay, and then come along this way. Okay, so then after you're done, you're going to want to trim off all this extra after the glue has dried, or the size. So like I said, there's lots of different things that you can do for the size. One of the most common things is just laundry starch. So water, starch, and that's really good for when you want translucent flats. We are going to just do a glue and water mixture. Some people like to use wheat paste. Some people like to use, there's a primer on the market. Some people like to use flex glue. Some people like to use wood glue. Everyone kind of has their own preference. So I always like to start from the center, work way out to the end, and you're trying to fill in the fabric. So then you have a nice surface. But this glue is going to soak through the fabric and glue itself to the wood below. So you want to make sure that you're getting a good amount of glue out towards the end. So that fabric is going to pull up and around that edge. So I like to really kind of get that corner to make sure that that corner is nice and secure. Some people just like to do it on the face, and then they just trim the fabric off to the front. Some people trim it off a little extra, because if you're just trimming to the edge, then that piece has a tendency to kind of peel off and get damaged. I like to wrap around the edge. I feel like it's a little more secure. So when that dries, that's the flat. Again, flip it over, trim it off. We've got just like 4 minutes left. I think we can just show some pictures real quick.
Yeah, so no matter what size it is, it's a lot of the same process. Sometimes you add more toggles, sometimes less toggles, just depending on what your framing needs for your specific flats. The general consistency for toggles is about every 2 feet for your flats.
For us, yeah, we like every 2 feet for theatrical style. That can vary. It can be every 4 feet, every 6 feet, every 8 feet. Just kind of depends on. Usually it's about 4 though for Hollywood. All right, 3 minutes. We can do it. No problem. So this is our town. This was a good example of Hollywood style flats. So these are just flats. They're 4 by. They ended up being 16 foot tall. So we've got lots of different flats in here. This panel right here and this panel right here were actually doors. So these were 4 foot by 8 foot flats that would swing open. And so we would stack various different flats. So this may be a 4 by 12 with a 4 by 4 sitting on top, just to get the height that we needed. So we're using our stock with other stock to get to what we want. The moon is actually a theatrical style flat. So it was built on an edge, and this was covered in muslin to give a nice painting surface. So it looked pretty nice. This was cabaret. These were, like I said, eventually your flats get really old. You want to get rid of them, you want to toss them. So our designer took out a lot of different flats, which was good. We, got rid of some of our old stock. So just kind of cutting them up. So being able to do that with the Luan covered is a nice thing. You can't really do that with fabric. So you can see it's a little better right here. And again, with doors, the theatrical Hollywood style is a lot sturdier. This was a good combination of theatrical and Hollywood. So all these flats sitting up top here for Colored Museum, these were theatrical style. So these were nice and lightweight, where down below, these are all Hollywood style. This was Pride and Prejudice. So these were